So I was talking on the phone with a friend who is autistic, and while we were talking about hypersensitivity, because I already identified as highly sensitive at this point, he started to say things like, yes, our autistic brains, they work a little different, they need a bit more space, they need a bit more time, a bit more rest. And the first few times I thought I'd misunderstood him when he said our autistic brains. But after like the fourth time, I asked him, why are you saying our autistic brains? I'm not autistic. And he said, are you too sure about that? And I was like, yes. Later that night, when we had hung up, I was still deeply confused by what he had said, even though I was pretty sure I was not autistic. The question just came back to me, could it actually be true? Could it be that I am? In my youth, I was the typical princess. I loved wearing pink dresses, playing with dolls, and all things girly. I conformed to the expectations of those around me, being shy, sweet, and easy to maintain. But beyond the image of the timid and sweet girl, I experienced difficulties in understanding other children and their behavior. I struggled with leaving the house and often felt exhausted by noises, other people, lights, smells, and touch. And quite often, instead of interacting with other children, I preferred to daydream and escape into my own worlds. What others found enjoyable often caused me stress, rather than the promised enjoyment that everyone said I would experience. As a result, I turned to reading books, repeatedly going through the same ones on a repetitive schedule. I didn't understand why I felt that way or why certain things were so challenging for me. Moreover, nobody around me seemed genuinely interested in finding out the cause of my difficulties. I was treated as if I was simply too lazy or too stubborn to make an effort and be more normal. Consequently, I internalized these beliefs and developed a strong self-disdain for all the aspects in which I appeared to be weak or wrong to others. During my teenage years, I started analyzing the differences between myself and other young people. And I created a complex, step-by-step master plan in my mind to overcome what others perceived as my weaknesses. It took a few years, but after graduating school, I transformed into an open, talkative, charming, and extroverted social butterfly. The master plan I had started at age 14 and refined and expanded over the next few years of my teenage life had actually worked. I felt like I had left the old difficulties behind. It was like overcoming a lifelong deficit. Finally, I was just the way people had always expected me to be: active, outgoing, charming, and social. And I was so happy to leave behind the person who had experienced so much criticism and disdain from others. Secretly, I had learned to look at my younger self through the same glasses as my environment used to. That was until the mask I had been wearing became too heavy for me. So this friend had called me autistic. And it confused me a lot. I couldn't believe it, because at this point in my journey, I barely knew anything about autism at all, and everything I did seem to know came from autistic characters on TV or movies. Also, that was a point in my life where I thought, like, I've completely overcome all of my difficulties. I look people into the eye, I can have conversations, and sure as hell, A person with autism wouldn't be able to do that. Or so I thought at that time. So I completely wanted to brush it off, and I did at first, but for some reason the topic kept nagging me because it was the only point where I felt like there might be a little chance that I could be autistic, and that was the sensory overstimulation and sensory overload I was experiencing regularly, all the time, almost each day, even in situations that I had a good feeling about, not only in situations that were stressful. It wasn't until I found female autism YouTubers that I finally started to understand what it looked like in reality to many people. Because reading the medical diagnosis criteria had never really reached me on a personal level, because, medical criteria always reads a bit dull and always, it's just a medical explanation. It's not necessarily a depiction of the reality of an individual or how certain symptoms play out. After a while, I felt like, what the hell? This fits so well to my own experience. A lot of my own behaviors were quite typical for women with autism. Even the becoming a social butterfly part and becoming very well adjusted in social situations and being very charming. So that was a big surprise. So after months, like, I'm not kidding you, over a year of researching the topic and really getting into it, really getting to know that it's a spectrum and that it looks different from everyone. After I actually found so many indicators that actually I might be autistic, I stood in front of the decision whether or not to get diagnosed. It was a bit of a step for me, because what if I am autistic? What would that change about me? How would that change my past, my life, everything I've been through? And I struggled with this decision for quite a few weeks until I finally decided, well, I will never find out if I don't go and talk to an expert about it. So I went to see a specialist who was focused on autism. And at first I wasn't even sure if she would have let me take the tests, because I can come off as perfectly capable in social situations because I've trained so hard for it. But she wanted me to take the tests. I think I had to take 4 or 5 tests. Went over, I think, 3 months until all the results were there. And I kind of liked the testing a lot. Some tasks in the test were a bit more easy. They were more like questionnaires where you had to fill in what your behavior in that situation would be or how you think about stuff. Other tests were a bit more practical, where you had to show how you think or how you would solve a problem in a certain situation. Some of these tests were a bit weird because they were actually designed for children, and I'm not sure why they were testing adults the same way. Then finally the results came. Probably will always remember how I sat in front of the expert and she said, after hearing you talk about your life, looking through all of the results of the testing, I think that you're on the autistic spectrum, you have autism. And I remember when she said that, it became all of a sudden so emotional, even though I had already assumed that I would be tested positive for autism. But hearing it from a professional after all these tests I had to take was really something else. And suddenly everything in my life just came together to a point where I said, okay, now this all makes sense for the first time in my life. And then there was another test which tested how good I am at hiding my autism to others. And there I was actually way above average. So I am actually very, very good at camouflaging my autism to the outside. It's not only that I used to have problems in social situations and understanding social situations as a teenager and as a child, and somehow learned to overcome them. I actually still have social problems and problems to understand other people, but I've learned to compensate for it, and I'm a high masking autistic person, which means most people would never guess that I have autism, even if I told them. Because also in the meantime of my diagnosis, I decided to make an experiment. I started to treat myself as if I knew for sure I was autistic. And I tried out all of the tips from the autistic YouTubers and from the autism community on YouTube, how to handle stressful situations better. When I'm in the kitchen, for example, cooking something, I'm very, very focused on cooking, and maybe I'm also cleaning up the kitchen at the same time. I'm thinking about my business and about work, and I'm very busy. My nervous system is on the edge already, And I'm so stressed out to fulfill all of these tasks and make them perfectly right. And then, for example, my partner comes in and asks me a question. And I just snap at him because of this information basically being the last drop in an already very, very full cup. And it spills over. Today, I'm able to say, okay, I can't talk to you right now. If not, I'm going to have a meltdown. Please, I'm coming back to you in a minute. Just let me finish this and I will be there. When I was still masking, I couldn't do that because you are supposed to be able to handle all of this stuff. So I was expecting myself to handle all of this. And I asked my boyfriend, hey, have I changed since I have started to assume that I might be autistic? And he said, no. We've been together for 8 years. So he said, no, you haven't changed at all. The only thing that is different is that you don't snap at me anymore out of nowhere. And today I can communicate my needs and just make sure this doesn't happen and sure people leave me alone, sure people respect my boundaries. It's just such a relief. I can tell you, it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So yeah, I have autism, I'm autistic, and I'm happy for the first time in life. I understand myself and it's just wonderful. I am about to do something. So I have a little bit of the problem that my desk is way too full, and it's partly because I have 4 different framed pictures lying around there. And now I think it's time to hang them finally on my artist wall. I don't know, I just started to really like my working space. So right there on the right side there's a bit of room. Of course I have a hammer, I have nails, 2 of the ladies I want to hang on my wall. Another lady, and the last lady. The thing about masking is that it's not just a strategy to hide something from others. That's actually camouflaging, and many people engage in it to some extent. Masking, on the other hand, goes beyond that. It's the conscious or unconscious act of suppressing and denying behaviors and needs that come naturally to you as an autistic person, even when you are alone. This type of masking can be harmful for autistic individuals. Just imagine having to suppress many of your spontaneous behaviors that make you who you are all the time, for years. That would affect anyone's mental health. For years and without knowing, I had hidden my autistic traits as much as possible from myself, still believing they were weaknesses, as I had been told, only noticing them when experiencing meltdowns, feeling overwhelmed, or being overstimulated. I even had autistic individuals on Instagram in the past telling me that they could relate to my writing so well. However, without the insight from a friend, I would have never even guessed that the reason behind this connection might be that I had been actually describing my own autistic experience long before I realized it. I am still in that process, because finally I have a manual that helps me understand myself and my brain, and it has become quite usual for me to go, oh, now that finally makes sense, every few days. I am really glad for the social skills I taught myself along the way, because I actually enjoy meeting new people and having new experiences. And by having learned these social skills, I can now choose whether or not I want to socialize. Before, successfully socializing wasn't even really an option. And that is the point. Before my diagnosis, I always felt like I had to be a social butterfly whenever someone was around, often pushing myself beyond what my nervous system could handle. This wasn't very self-loving because I didn't allow myself to take a break or acknowledge my need to retreat, because I was once taught to believe that being like this was a very bad thing. And today I can have it both ways. I can enjoy social events and interact with people while still honoring my boundaries. I am fully aware that my brain functions differently from that of a neurotypical person, and that is not a negative thing. It is simply a fact. Getting an autism diagnosis not only provided me an explanation, but also the ability and courage to confidently communicate my needs to others. Regaining my true self has helped me understand which parts and behaviors are true to my heart and which are not. It's a process, and I still have a long way to go. But as I write this, I am confident that things will turn out fine, that I will be fine. And I am happy to now be able to take you with me on this journey of artsy, lighthearted, thoughtful, emotional, and magical beauty.